The reign of King Gep. A short time after ascending the throne, Gep left his palace to travel to Egypt Delta, following his father as he flew through the sky to visit the town of Ayat Neps. Upon arrival, Gep inquired about the locality, asking the gods to tell him of everything that had happened there to Re, of any battles that had occurred, as well as any events occurring concerning Shu. As they regaled Gep with the tales of Shu's great victory against the children of Apophis, they mentioned that the former ruler had worn a living uraeus, a wearing cobra on his head. This was news to Gep, who now desired to wear the living uraeus himself, just as his father had done. Unfortunately, it had been sealed in a chest hidden somewhere in Pi Yarat, near the modern Saft El Hena in the Delta, and would first need to be located. Such trivialities would not deter the newly crowned king. However, without delay, he assembled his followers and set out his quest for the living uraeus. Gep and his entourage quickly discovered the chest's location, but as the divine king leaned forward to open the lid, the uraeus leaped from within and breathed a great flame against him. Gep's followers died instantly, incinerated by the force of the fire. The king survived, but his head badly burnt. Reeling from the pain, Gep made his way to the field of the Henu plants to search for relief, but found none. He then commanded one of his followers to bring the wig of Re, a magical item infused with power, regarded as the only object capable of healing his wound. The wig successfully healed Gep and later performed further miracles. For one, it is transformed into a crocodile who became known as Subek of Lat Nebis, healed and resting in his residence at Ichitwai. I don't know how to say that word. Just north of the Farium oasis. Gep's next act was to dispatch a military force against rebellious Asiatics. Azantics, bringing large numbers back to Egypt as prisoners. He then listened to more tales of the reign of Shu. Before asking for a list of all places that both Re and Shu had commanded be built on earth. Most of these locations have been destroyed by the rebellious children of Apophis. So Gep commanded that they be rebuilt. Millions of settlements were refounded and their names were recorded in great lists, including on the side of the naos, from which this myth derives. Testaments to Geb, good deeds for Egypt. Despite his success as ruler, Geb saw in his son Osiris a worthy king of Egypt, a god who could lead the land of good fortune, and so decided to dedicate his throne, just as Shu and Re had done before him. He awarded Osiris the land, its waters, its winds, its plants, and its cattle, and all that flies, all that alights, its reptiles, and its desert game. Thus Osiris became king, and a new era and the new reign of the gods began. The reign of King Osiris. With the abdication of Geb, the crown passed on to his son Osiris. As god associated with fertility and generation, who in death, for Egyptian gods were not immune to death, became king of the Duat and the ruler of the blessed dead. In art, Osiris is depicted as tightly wrapped mummy standing upright or sitting enthroned with skin colored green or black to represent the fertile soil. He holds the crook and flail of a pharaoh in his hands and wears an elaborate collar around his neck as well as an atef crown on his head. His crown is similar to the pharaonic white crown of Upper Egypt, being tall and tapering to a bulbous peak, but with the addition of two plumes at the sides of it, sometimes embellished with sun discs and horns. Coronation and rule. Recrowned Osiris with the Atef crown in the Heliopolitan Nome, but the crown's powerful heat was such that it caused the new king to fall ill. Its effects were so long lasting that after the ceremony, Red found Osiris sitting in his house, his face all swollen. It was an auspicious start to his reign, but Osiris quickly gained the reputation of being a great benevolent king. Indeed, he was well prepared for the job, having served a vizier, chief priest of Heliopolis, and royal herald before inheriting the crown, and standing a cubit 6 palms and 3 fingers tall, about 4.7 meters or 15.4 feet. He could certainly intimidate an enemy on the battlefield. His reign is described as a time of prosperity, when all resources were well controlled and the land was stable. Life was good. The disordered waters of Noon were kept at bay. The cold north wind blew. Something particularly longed for in the fierce Egyptian heat, and animals procreated. Conspirators were crushed, and Osiris was respected among the gods. In fact, the only significant problem faced by Osiris during his early reign happened when one night a storm hit Egypt and the goddess Sekhmet had to save him using her power over water. In later legends, persevered for posterity to two Greek historians, Diodorus Siculus and Plutarch, who wrote in the 1st century BC and 2nd century AD, respectively. We find that the establishment of various social structures and customs was attributed to Osiris during his reign. Plutarch relates how, as king, the god taught the Egyptians how to cultivate the land. He also gave them laws and taught them to honor the gods. According to Diodorus Siculus, Osiris did many good deeds for the social life of mankind. For a start, making them give up cannibalism, since Isis had discovered wheat and barley. They took up eating these instead of each other. Isis also established laws, while Osiris built temples to his parents and other gods at Thebes. Both deities honored those who nurtured the arts and made technological advances. One advance in particular was the development of copper tools, which helped people to kill animals and conduct agricultural activities more effectively. According to Diodorus, Osiris was the first to invent and taste wine, and he took counsel with thought on every matter. Another source describes Kentamentu, a deity who is normally a form of Osiris, serving as the god king's vizier, the god who, the personification of authority, served as Osiris' general in Upper Egypt, while Sia, perception, was his general in Lower Egypt. Afterwards, both Diodorus and Plutarch relate Osiris gathered a great army and traveled the world, teaching its populations about wine and how to sell wheat and barley, leaving Isis, his sister's wife, with whom he had apparently begun his relationship in the womb, to rule Egypt in his absence with Thoth as her consort. Osiris took his son Anubis and Macedon, a Greek name, substituting for the Egyptian god Wet, along with him, as well as Min. His army consisted of men experienced in agriculture, musicians, singers, and dancers. Osiris was apparently fond of laughter, food, and entertainment. Plutarch says that he would win over those he met through charm and persuasiveness, along with the lure of music and dance. Like many gap year students, when he set off on his travels, Osiris decided to let his hair grow until returning home. First, he marched south into Ethiopia, where he found cities, taught people the wonders of agriculture, and left men to rule in his name. These were trusted individuals from he could collect tribute. Eventually, he made his way to India and founded further cities. Osiris' journey was not entirely peaceful. However, in Thrace, for example, he slew the king of the barbarians. After making his way the entire world, Osiris returned to Egypt with countless exotic gifts. Ooh. Oh my God. This is beautiful. Oh my God. Sorry. The children of Osiris. According to Plator, Osiris had an affair with his sister Nephthys, wife of Seth, believing her to be Isis. Well, they do look alike. Despite the shock of infidelity, Isis went in search of the child born of her husband's adulterous union because Nephthys had left him exposed, and typically Roman practice, and so perhaps a detail added to the myth of Plator out of fear of Seth's retributions for extramarital affair. After much trouble, Isis tracked down the child with the help of dogs. She brought the child up and he became her guardian, Anubis. Anubis was not Osiris' first child, however, although his most famous child, by his sister's wife Isis, is Horus, the child he first fathered, an obscure daughter known only from a spell at late Middle Kingdom date, who he had the role of molding mud bricks. Apparently, she had been of the opinion that Osiris should live only on dahis, plants, a form of poisonous herb, and honey, which is bitter to those of the Dua, Osiris' afterlife home. Given these sentiments, she was perhaps sent to mold mud bricks as a form of punishment for her murderous thoughts towards her father, the god Babi, an aggressive divine baboon who lived in human entrails, was also said to be the eldest son of Osiris, and Sopdet, the personification of the brightest sun in the sky. Cyrus is to be another daughter. In the coffin text, the jackal god Wet, associated with funerals and cemeteries, is also described as the son of Osiris. Sorry. But this is a description of Nephthys, typically depicted in human form as a goddess, but sometimes as a kite. Nephthys, meaning mistress of the mansion, was one of the 4 children of Nut and Gept, and wife to her brother Seth, According to later legends, she was also mother of Anubis. In myth, she helped her sister Isis to protect and resurrect Osiris, mourned his death with her, and helped guard Horus from Seth. She played a similarly protective role for the deceased. Her image is often found on Skrakonji, and she, along with her god Hapi, guarded the lungs of the dead, kept separately from the mummifications in a canopic jar. Nephis had no cult centered of her own, but found frequently on amulets from the 26th dynasty onwards. The murder of Osiris by Seth. The only complete resurrections of the glory of Osiris that come from accounts provided by the Greek author who met above, Diodorus Siculus, and Plutarch. Ancient Egyptian sources shine little light on what happened, because to describe the god's death in any detail was against decorum. Here we all shall first recreate the full account from the Greek sources, and then show how they were backed up by details from ancient Egyptian texts, from tombs and papyri. Although Plutarch's account is later in date, it is the fuller of the two, and when we begin with it. The Osiris myth, according to Plutarch and Diodorus. After Osiris returned home from his travels, his brother Seth plotted against him, gathering 72 conspirators and working in cooperations with an Ethiopian queen. Seth secretly measured Osiris' body and made a beautiful chest of his size, ornamented with jewels. He ordered it be brought into a chamber where festivities were being held, so that everyone present could marvel at its beauty. His guests, suitably impressed, Seth announced that whoever best fit the chest when laying within could keep it. Enticed by its offer, the guests took turns trying to fit inside, but without success, until Osiris lay within and found it perfectly matched his size. At that moment, Seth's conspirators leapt forward and sealed it shut, hammering nails into its wood frames and pouring molten lead over any gaps. Without wasting time, they hurled the chest into the river and watched as it sailed along the Nile towards the sea. This was said to have occurred in either the 28th year of Osiris' reign or his life. Hearing of this macabre event in the city of Coptos, cut off a tree of hair and donned a garment of mourning. She wondered Hearing these macabre events, Isis in the city of Coptos cut off a tree of her hair and donned a garment of mourning. She wandered at her wit's end until one day she came across a group of children and asked if they had seen the chest. Luckily for her, they had, though at the time it was heading towards the sea. After further investigation, Isis learned that the chest had made its way to Blablus, where the sea had deposited it in a clump of heather. There it had grown into a great tree, which concealed the chest within its trunk. Grown into a great tree, which concealed the chest. Okay, God, sorry. Unwilling to waste any further time, Isis set off to retrieve the chest. But while she traveled, the king of Blabos came to the seashore to admire the great size of the tree, wanting a sturdy pillar to support the roof of his palace. He cut down the thickest section of the tree, the part concealing Osiris's chest, and took it home with him, so that when Isis arrived, she found nothing but the remains of the trunk. She sat by a spring, dejected and tearful, and there met the queen's maidservants. She spoke with them, plaited their hair, and gave them a wondrous fragrance. When the maidservants returned to the palace, the queen smelled their perfumes and immediately asked for Isis to be brought before her. She then appointed Isis as a nurse to her baby. Each night while the king and queen slept, Isis magically burnt away the mortal portions of the baby's prince's body, transformed it into a swallow to fly around the pillar that bore the corpse of Osiris, wailing and lamenting the loss of her husband. One night, the queen heard the noise outside her bedroom door and crept out to investigate. Finding her baby on fire, she screamed, halting Isis' magic and denying the baby prince immortality. Discovered Isis now displayed her true form as a goddess and demanded the pillar. The queen, unable to deny the request, looked on as Isis removed the pillar. Luckily, it wasn't load-bearing, and cut away at the wood until the chest was revealed. Isis immediately threw herself upon the coffin, wailing so intense were the goddess' emotions that the baby prince dropped dead. Returning to Egypt, Isis hid the chest, but Seth, out hunting one night, by the light of the moon, came across it. Recognizing the body, he tore it into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Isis learned of his discretion and sailed through the swamps in papyrus boat, searching for the pieces of her husband. She found every part of Osiris's body except for his phallus, which had been eaten by Nile fish. So she fashioned a replacement instead. Plutarch relates here that the son Myth represents Isis holding a separate funeral for each body part, wherever she found it, explaining why so many locations claim Osiris's tomb. Other myths report that the only pretended to bury parts of the body in these locations so as to receive more divine honors for her husband. Multiple burials also had the added benefits of preventing Seth from ever discovering the god's true tomb. The Diodorus account of Osiris's death is a little more succinct. He relates how Seth murdered his brother and cut his body into 26 pieces, each of which was given to one of his followers. But Isis and Horus, presumably the elder Horus, see page 56, does not feature Platon's account, took a revenge slaughtering Seth as his followers. Afterwards, Isis sought out and gathered together all the pieces of Osiris except for his penis, which had been lost. To protect her husband's body from Seth, immune to slaughter, Isis decided to keep his burial place a secret. But this created a dilemma. How could the people of Egypt honor Osiris if there was no tomb to visit? Her solution was ingenious. She took each part of Osiris's body and formed a complete replica of his shape from spices and wax, so that irrespective of the body parts presented, Osiris appeared complete. She then summoned priests in separate groups and bestowed upon each of them their own corpse, explaining that this was the true body of Osiris and instructing them to look after it by burying it in their district and performing daily cult offerings. Honored, each group of priests departed to build a tomb for the dead god. For this reason, very many locations across Egypt claim the true burial of Osiris. Diodorus adds that Isis vowed never to remarry and spent her life ruling Egypt. She became immortal in death and was buried near Memphis. Ancient Egyptian sources of Osiris's myth. The Pusanti of Egyptian sources for the myth of Osiris' death is complicated also by the fact that the myth changed over thousands of years of Egyptian history, with the first evidence for it found in the pyramid texts inscribed on the walls of the pyramid of King Unas of the Old Kingdom. The accountable in the pyramid texts from scattered references across the pyramid text spells its possible construct that Isis and Nephthys, in the form of kites, went in search of the body of Osiris, who had been thrown to the ground on the river banks at Nephthys by Seth, seemingly because Osiris had kicked him. Upon finding the body, Isis and Nephthys made the ritual gestures of mourning. Isis sat with her arms on top of his head, and Nephthys seized the tips of her breasts. The goddesses managed to hold Osiris' decay by preventing his bodily fluid from dripping to the ground and by stopping his corpse from smelling foul. Finally, through rituals and magic, they revived their brother. The variant of the myth of the pyramid text tells that Osiris' body was discovered in Gehetset, Gazelle land after he had been felled on his side by Seth. Further spells, however, indicates that Osiris drowned, or at least that he was drowned into the water after he had been killed. This detail that Osiris died by drowning is in fact supported by later texts. An inscription, probably by the New Kingdom, quotes Horus, commands to Isis and Nephthys that they grasp Horus to save him from becoming submerged in the water and that had drowned him. In an early 26th dynasty papyrus also refers to Osiris as having been thrown into the river and floating all the way to Emet in the northeast delta. Papyrus Salt 8025, whose text is a ritual for the end of the mummifications operations that incorporates the elements of this myth, places Osiris in Tawar, the Great Land, a reference to the nomes in which Abydos, his main cult center, was traditionally found. At the time of his death, Seth intercepted Osiris there, attacking him within Netted in Hachifu, two locations in Abydos, under the old tree on the 17th day of the first month inundation. Seth committed an act of violence against Osiris and threw himself into the water. The god Nun, as water rose, to cover Osiris' body and took him away to heighten his mysteries. Hearing of these events, Re came in haste to see what had occurred. Shu and Tefnu cried and screamed, and the cosmos fell into chaos. The gods and the goddesses placed their arms on their heads. There was night without day, and the sun disk became obscured, and the